All right, let's kick things off looking ahead to Christmas. It's just under 2 months away now, and the big question is whether or not we're going to be allowed to celebrate with our families. And if we're not allowed to, whether we will anyway. Environment Secretary George Eustice told Julia Hartley-Brewer this morning that it's still too early to say what restrictions will be in place then. I think they're just biding their time and sort of, putting their finger in the wind and trying to gauge what the public opinion is going to be, and I personally think it's pretty clear. Meanwhile, the Lib Dems in the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland are asking for coronavirus restrictions to be the same, exactly the same, across all 4 UK nations, because they say, and there's some logic in this, that they say that travel between nations is going to be inevitable during the festive period. So they want a 4-nation summit to agree a shared, practical plan, to basically acknowledge reality here. Of course, Downing Street's line is that the best way to get back to some sort of normal is for everyone to follow the official guidelines to the letter. And this comes, as I said, after Victoria Derbyshire, the broadcaster, had to apologise for saying that she would break the rule of 6. She was unequivocal about it. She was going to break the rule of 6 so that her family could celebrate Christmas together. And then she had to do a swift U-turn. One wonders whether she did it off her own bat or whether she was put under a lot of pressure maybe by her employers at the Beeb. So what are your plans for Christmas, given these strict rules? Do ring and text and tell me. But I'm joined now by Roy Lilley, who's the former NHS Trust chairman. Mr. Lilley, good morning. Thanks for coming on.
Morning, Richard.
Let's say that you have a close family of 8. Would you be tempted to break the rule of 6 on Christmas Day?
Listen, I don't work for the BBC, so, yeah, so probably.
Very honest of you. Carry on.
Look, I mean, this is really tricky. And I think, Richard, it's worth remembering what happened at the beginning of lockdown with Eid. There were lots of families who'd spent a lot of money, a lot of time buying their new dresses, getting the food organised, travel, wanting to see their families. And they said, and the government said Eid is cancelled this year.
Yep.
And, in fairness, they took it on the chin and they did the right thing. So I think, Christmas, Eid, we've got to do the right thing.
Yeah, well, that was then. I mean, things have changed dramatically, haven't they? And I'm not going to name any names, but I have lost count, as my predecessor on air this morning, Julia Hartley-Brewer, said, I've lost count of the number of sensible, law-abiding, clever, wise people who are going to break the rule of 6 at Christmas. They're going to. They're planning to. Not by having a wild rave, not by having a huge barbecue, but they are going to have more than 6 people around. I've spoken to them, and they're not going to change their minds on this. Don't we have to face up to that reality?
I guess we do. I mean, the way round it is to be a lot more sensible in the run-up to Christmas. I thought George Eustice's answers this morning on the station were useless, frankly. I mean, he's fanning around pretending that Christmas isn't going to come.
I must admit, I missed that bit. I must have been walking from the car to the building. What was he saying?
Well,
what was his pitch?
He kind of, how these politicians kind of dodge a question.
No, I've never known that to happen.
Well, you need to listen to more radio, Richard.
Go on.
But it was just hopeless. Look, if you want to give your granny a hug at Christmas, we've got to squeeze COVID now, and that's really what we need to be doing. People need to understand that unless you're going to go and break the rules, and that's not really a very sensible thing to do because it brings with it all kinds of risks, we do need to figure out what we're going to do now. So, for example, what are we going to do about bringing the kids home from uni?
Yep.
There's no point in bringing them all home at the one time. The uni should be doing an intensive testing scheme now. All the kids that are testing negative should be sent home. So they come home in dribs and drabs. They don't all come down the M1 or up the M1 or whatever it is at one time. That will be bonkers. So we need to work with the unis to get that working. We need to think very carefully about what we do for care homes. So we've got to start testing relatives. We've got to make sure that you can have a COVID clean relative in the care home at Christmas with the appropriate distancing and all the rest of it. We've got to help care homes to do that. That means now, I've mentioned testing twice. We all know the issues that there are with testing. We absolutely have to get testing working by the end of this month, or we will be in real trouble. And on top of that, we've got to think about what do we do with tiers? Because at the moment, if you're in tier 3, you can't move into a tier 2. And I'm living in London at the moment. I'm in tier 2, but it's just up the road in Essex. They're not in tier 2. No. So we need to think about how people can travel between tiers. Now, it is not impossible if we could get a grip on the R number over the next what have we got, 40 days, something like that, that the rule of 6 could be relaxed. The rule could be up to 8 or 10, maybe. And it's possible for the government to do that. But they won't do anything, Richard, unless they absolutely confront the issue and start planning now. It's no good sending ministers on the daily milk run around the wireless stations and the TV studios saying, oh, well, Christmas is a long while. It's not. And we know that what we do today manifests itself in either deaths or no deaths in a fortnight's time.
Roy,
we really do have to get organised. And if the government don't do it, we should do it ourselves.
Roy, you are a breath of fresh air. I'll tell you that for free. And it's because, and I'll go back to an analogy that I was making on Monday when I did the first show, and obviously we've been talking about really nothing but lockdown since then. My analogy for the blunt force weapon of lockdown is that it's just playing hide and seek with the virus. We just hide away from it for 2, 4, 8 weeks, whatever. Then we come out and the virus is just waiting for us, and it all starts again, and then we have to go into lockdown again, and it's clearly not working. So that was my analogy, and a very good friend of mine said a couple of days ago, yeah, we should be playing chess with the virus. We should be applying the lessons we've learned and our experience of the last 6 months to outwit it, and that's exactly what you've just done. You've just actually laid out a series of chess moves, clever, strategic thinking, as opposed to this simple-minded, no, lockdown, that's the only thing we can do. And you've just come up with about 5 different ideas to attack specific problems, problem areas, care homes, students. Why on earth? And you know what you're talking about. You're a former chairman of the NHS Trust, so you're not just spinning out of control. You are thinking about these things. Why can't the government do what you've just done and think and act intelligently? What's going on?
Well, I mean, listeners may not like this answer, but fundamentally it comes down to leadership. The way in which the government is leading the coronavirus response is summed up by the Prime Minister as whack-a-mole, which is an arcade game where you hit a mole over and it pops up and you hit it again. That is exactly what we're doing. We need a strategic response, not a whack-a-mole response. And Johnson is a populist. You can see what's happening with the Marcus Rashford thing. Instead of saying, right, strategically, why are kids hungry? What have we got to do to fix this and put things in place to fix it? I mean, the voucher scheme was okay as an immediate response.
Yes.
But now he's boxed himself in a corner because people say, well, you did vouchers then, why can't you do it now? We need to have a proper strategic response. And this government has been on the back foot pretty much since it started. It's facing a huge problem with Brexit. Whether you're for it or against it, it's going to get worse.
Yep.
And we've got a government that works off the back foot and not on the front foot.
Now, let's just talk about the law here, because in a dictatorship, you can apply any law you like because you can force it through with blunt trauma force. We live in a democracy, and laws only work in a democracy if people agree with them. If people agree that in general they make sense and they can see the logic to them, and they are prepared to follow them. But if you have basically a mass response to a law, and the rule of 6 is a law, it's illegal to gather in groups of more than 6. If you have a law that people don't believe in anymore and are fully prepared to break, then you can't apply it. And basically, as a government, you've lost control. You've lost control, and it's the people telling you what to do. And I'm talking about outside an election. I am saying here that it is my opinion, journalistically and as a person with a pulse, that there are going to be millions of people who are fully prepared to break the law this Christmas. They are going to be meeting in groups of more than. It's going to happen. It's not a maybe or an if. It's going to happen. Don't you think the government should be open-eyed, recognising that and making their dispositions, as you said, now and not in a month's time or 6 weeks' time when it's too late?
Yes, Richard, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're policed by what's called consent.
Yes.
And we've seen social disobedience in Trafalgar Square, where people have had the protests against wearing the mask. Now, I think we should be wearing a mask. A lot of people don't. And so if you remember, 3 or 4 weekends ago, the Metropolitan Police were pretty much overwhelmed by God knows how many thousands it was. They've gathered in Trafalgar Square. You can't do anything unless the public consent. By and large, we consent to the rules. Now, the reason people consent to the rules is that, first of all, they see the sense and common sense
Exactly.
in them, and secondly, they can comply with them. If you look at track and tracing, for example, a lot of people say track and tracing isn't working. Actually, structurally, it is. The reason it doesn't work is that the people are ducking out of track and tracing because they can't afford not to go to work and they don't want to lose their job. And it's the same with this rule of six, rule of eight, whatever it is. I mean, it sounds arbitrary for most people. So firstly, you have to explain why six.
And they haven't done that. Eight. They haven't explained why. They've never explained where six came from.
No, they haven't. And you know, if it's got a science foundation, they should tell us. Secondly, I'm talking to you now from London Borough of Newham. I want to know what the R number is here, how many people have died and what the numbers are. What are the statistics? Make it real for me so I can say, do you know what? I'm living in a really tricky area here. I better comply.
Yep.
So we just tell people what the score is. And then if you look at what happens in Scotland every day, the young woman that runs the First Minister of Scotland, whose name's just escaped me, she's on the radio every day, on the television every day, with the numbers.
Sturgeon, Nicola Sturgeon, yeah.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon. She's on there, smart. You know, she got all of the answers. She does her thing every day. She's done it day for God knows how many days. She's developed a relationship with the public so that they trust her. They hear her answering questions. The press question her. She's been very robust. What do we get? A dishevelled bloke who looks like he gets his hair cut in B&Q, popping up occasionally, ticking us all off from a lectern in Downing Street.
In that case,
it's handled so badly.
Can I then present you with a scenario of not too hopefully far from reality fantasy, but tell me how you'd react to this. If the next time Boris Johnson gave one of his live TV press conferences, what if he said something along these lines? And I'm not going to impersonate him, but if he said something along these lines, all right, we've had a root and branch review of everything. We're going to be honest and open with you. Not everything that we've been doing over the last 6 months has worked or is working now, and we're going to change things. But I'm going to cut a deal with you, the British people. We will actually relax and, if not completely, abandon lockdown across the country if you do something for us and yourselves. Guarantee to wear a mask every time you go into a shop, into any public space. Guarantee to wash your hands as you go in. Take sanitizer with you. Most of the shops supply, and do it when you leave. Do keep your social distancing. Don't have raves or big parties. Follow all the sensible guidelines to manage this, and we'll drop lockdown. But we will enforce what I've just said. We will enforce the wearing of masks. If you don't wear your mask, you will be fined on the spot. Something like that, where we are trusted to look after ourselves and to use our common sense without being crammed into tier 3 or tier 2, or I don't think anyone's in tier 1 except Cornwall. How would you respond to that kind of I'll cut you a deal approach from the Prime Minister?
Absolutely. I would say, Richard, tell Judy to start measuring the curtains up in number 10 because you got the job. I mean, most of us would vote for that. Absolutely. It's very sensible. You have to have the relationship with the public. It's an essential part of leadership. And of course, the other thing in the NHS, when it gets really chock-a-block busy in A&E, they have what they call a pause. And everybody says, right, stop. What are we doing? Is it the right thing? Do we all agree? Do we want to change anything that we're doing now? And then they start again. It's a standard operating procedure. And, you know, government has broken all the rules of management. It's got an abysmal communications policy. It's got very poor leadership. It's got a confused cabinet, and it's starting to show. And I absolutely agree. Leaders are visible, have a vision, and share it often. Three things.
Why? I mean, you make an analogy with the NHS stop routine, stop protocol. You just hang on, everybody. Are we going in the right direction with this case, or do we need to treat the patient or patients differently? Very, very good analogy. Why do you think it is that to this very moment in time, the government and Boris Johnson are only taking advice from a very, very narrow viewpoint scientifically? You know, we're following the science, they keep saying, but no, they're not. They're following a tiny ribbon of science, and there is a huge, broad church of scientific opinion in this country and around the world, and I've said this every day this week, including Nobel Prize-winning scientists who are saying loud and clear, you're getting this wrong, guys. Even the World Health Organization argues stridently against lockdown. Who says we shouldn't have lockdown? Maybe quarantine, but not lockdown. Why do you think, why is the government so hell-bent on only listening to a handful of advisors who come from one position only? Why aren't they inviting a broad church of opinion so they can make a much more balanced policy decision?
Yes, I think there are a number of things there. I would say. I mean, first of all, we don't have a minister for the COVID response. We don't have a Secretary of State for the pandemic. So you're getting a sort of coalition of views. So there's no focal point. I mean, it's supposed to be Johnson, but he's missing most of the time, and he's got a lot of other things to think about. So. Yeah. Firstly, you need one single person running this, one accountable person. Secondly, I think the science, as far as the science is concerned, I mean, I think the science is pretty consistent, but the science is inconvenient. And the difficulty is that they have to keep the economy going. And at the end of the day, as much as the pandemic is about saving lives and keeping people well, somehow or other, we've got to do something to try and keep the economy going. Now, what Johnson has done is to introduce regional tiered lockdowns, which makes a lot of sense because you don't lock down Manchester for the same reasons that you lock down the West Country.
Right.
So we all understand that. But here's the problem. He's ended up having a row with everybody, and it's a Dutch auction about, I'll give you this if you're locked down. We don't have a clear set of rules. It's what I just said. Have a vision, be clear about what it is and keep repeating it. How do you get into tier 2? What are the rules? Make it clear. So if I'm living in tier 2, I know I'm in tier 2. I don't know why. And I don't know how I get out of tier 2. So I think the science, you're right to point to, there are contradictions in science, but there always are. I mean, I've found that in my career,
Sure.
Trying to run medical services. But, people have different opinions and they're often very valid. But this is actually a managerial and leadership problem. And we've got ourselves into a situation where the regional things do make sense, but how do you end up having a stand-up row with the mayor of Manchester over whether or not he's going to lock down? I mean, it's just bonkers.
I know.
And that, of course, then that makes toxic all the other relationships with all the other local authorities.
I know. And what does it say to the people of Manchester, most importantly? Because if their mayor, their elected representative, is publicly saying that the statistics that have been quoted to him and to his council by the government are being twisted, they're not true. For example, claims that the ICU units in Manchester were being overwhelmed, and they weren't. They were normal for that time of year. And he was picking apart a lot of the statistical so-called evidence that was being presented to persuade him to agree to tier 3. And he was saying, no, it's not true. What about the people of Manchester? Now tier 3 is in place. I mean, we don't know. I haven't seen any reportage coming out of Manchester. But if their own mayor says this isn't necessary, we don't need tier 3, they're unlikely to obey it. They're unlikely to follow the ruling stringently. Exactly. If their own leadership is saying this is nonsense.
Exactly. And what's the answer, Richard? You publish the data.
Absolutely.
You publish daily counts of who's in hospital, who isn't, how many spare beds you've got. You do daily counts of testing results, and you put it up on, those kind of digital things they put up by the side of the road where there's a traffic jam or it says a diversion or something, those yellow things on little wheels with the big digital screen on them. And you put them up in the high street. You put it on local radio. You put posters up. You stick it in the shops. This is a COVID-free shop.
Listen, never mind my wife measuring the curtains for number 10. I think your wife should be measuring the curtains for number 10. Right? I think you should be in there running it. Or I think maybe you should be made the minister without portfolio and get in there and get these policies in. I think one thing, we'll just finish on this, one thing which I think is probably the most undermining factor in the way that the government has responded to this are the incoherent inconsistencies in the rules and regulations. For example, when the show's over, I could go and see my son, who works in an office about half a mile from here. I don't know how many people are going to be in the office. Let's say there were 50 in there. I don't know. And I could move among them, and obviously I'd keep my social distance and all the rest of it, bump elbows and not give embraces, have a cup of coffee, have a long chat with my son and his colleagues. But then I can't go for a drink with them in the pub round the corner. I've just spent an hour with 50 people, including my son, but then my son and I are not allowed to go to the pub round the corner and have a drink. No, even if we say it's just bonkers. It makes zero sense.
It is. And, we talked about Nicola Sturgeon earlier, and I heard her answering that very question. She said, look, whenever you put rules in place, there'll be anomalies. It's up to all of us to do the right thing.
Yes. Well, Roy Lilley, former NHS chairman, I'll say that again, I'll say it a third time, NHS God, what's wrong with me? NHS Trust Chairman. Did you ever have trouble like that?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
Thank you for bailing me out. I was going to say, and actually, I think everybody listening to this would agree he should be the first minister for the coronavirus. Get in there and sort it out. I'm going to write that in my column in the Daily Express on Saturday. I'm going to say that they should be coming to you. That was some of the best advice and analysis that I've heard on any radio station over the last 3 or 4 months. Thanks very much indeed, Roy.